So Green Lantern Emerald Twilight is the definitive Green Lantern story for Hal Jordan, right? In almost every sense of the word, because this is the story of how Hal Jordan wipes out the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps, all due to grief. Nothing more than grief. Right, so this story takes place in Green Lantern issues 48 through 50, in case you end up wanting to pick it up on your own, and it actually takes place in the aftermath of Reign of the Supermen, specifically in Superman issue number 80, because in that story, Coast City was completely destroyed, and that's the hometown of Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan had actually been out in space at the time in a story called Trinity, but once he shows back up here and realizes Coast City's been destroyed, everything he knows and loves is completely and totally gone. Right, and so what he ends up doing is actually using his ring to create a construct of his father. Now, here's the kicker about this, and it's one of these things that, as I understand it, is still kind of left to myth and hearsay, that this is not actually his father, that instead it is basically just a subconscious projection of what he imagined his father to be like and how his father had treated him over the course of his life on a conscious level. And so that's the reason why when his father shows up here, the conversation is one part understanding and one part anger. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that Hal Jordan always had this kind of hero worship of what was really in effect an idealized version of his father. And that's what he brings up here. He says, it's just being here. It's got me thinking, right? Brings back a lot of memories from my childhood. What I remember most is you, how I looked up to you, worshiped the ground you walked on, or flew over. I wanted to grow up and be you. That was the whole philosophy of Hal. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. And he says, I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted that so much. And I just wanted to hear you say it one time. Now, this is kind of a big thing because the relationship between a father and a son is everything. Right? At the outset, when boys are young, the relationship with their mother is usually the more prominent relationship. But as time begins to go on and they begin to step into the role of becoming what it means to be a man or understanding what it means to be a man, a lot of that comes from the direction of their father, or at least the example their father sets. And so in turn, sons seek the approval of their fathers. And that's what you're looking at here, right? Hal Jordan always wanted the approval of his dad, but he never really got it, right? He says, you hardly knew I was alive. You were always patting Jack or Jim on the back, telling them how great they were, right? And that's where his father says, your brothers, right? They had actually done things. They had real accomplishments. You always had your head in the clouds, right? You were, and then of course, Hal Jordan finishes that and says, a space case, right? Which kind of gives credence to the idea that it's not really his father. It's just his mental projection of his father, right? And that's where Hal says, is that really what you thought of me? That I was some kind of a space case, right? Well, take a look at the person that I am now and the person that I've become. I'm a hero, right? Like I turned that head in the clouds mentality into something, right? You didn't give me one damn bit of encouragement and I'm a hero now. No thanks to you, right? Do you have any idea of the things that I've done? And that's where his father asks, like what, Hal, right? You didn't really do much to save Coast City, did you? And again, that's why it feels like a psychic projection of his father. Hal's grief and the fact that he blames himself for the failure of Coast City manifests in how his father speaks to him, right? And that's where his father just says, goodbye, Hal, right? I have a plane to catch. And that's the irony because his father died in a plane crash, right? Literally in a flight accident. And like Hal watched it happen. And it's one of these things where he's always beat himself over the head with it, right? It's kind of been a motivation to a degree. And of course, forcing himself to rewatch it again is really just him punishing himself in almost every conceivable way. But then his mother shows up here, and this is when you get the more tender part of the conversation, right? Where he says, I didn't expect you to be here. And she says, I thought you might need someone, right, to talk to. I know how your father can be. And that's where he just says, yeah, like, Dad's the same kind of dick that he always was. And says, well, maybe he's just like he was, right? Just kind of the person that he is. But I guess I'll always be a failure in his eyes. That's all, right? Nothing I can do is going to change that. And that's where his mother speaks in. And in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like the rational part of Hal trying to convince him, look at what you're doing and stop doing it, right? The reasonable part, because she says, you can't keep carrying that around, Hal, or it's going to poison you. You have to leave it and him behind. It's exactly what I did. And that's where Hal asked the question, what was that like? I mean, like, how did you get through it when the plane went down? And she just says, bit by bit. So I want to make sure that we're putting forward this idea that it's not as though his mother didn't love his father. And it's not as though she was just like, thank God he died. I just couldn't wait to get out of that marriage. It wasn't anything like that, right? When you are a person with a romantic partner and that romantic partner dies in a tragic situation, it will upend your life and not everyone recovers. And that's kind of what she's hitting at here, right? Bit by bit, piece by piece. She never quite became whole, right? And she says that your father was a hard man sometimes, right? You know that, but I loved him dearly. When he was killed, I thought I would die. There were times when I wished I would, because that would have been easier than the pain that she experienced. And she says, every time a jet from the testing grounds flew over the house, I was sure it was him up there, putting some new Ferris hardware through its paces. Then I'd remind myself the last time I saw him, the last time I'd ever see him, there weren't enough remains to identify. But honestly, Hal, you just go on, right? One day after another, eventually I didn't have to make a conscious effort not to set his place for dinner. It's like that. The grieving stops and you're left with the memories. I remembered him dressing up as Santa Claus our first Christmas together. I remembered the way he smelled just after he shaved. I remembered all the good things, Hal, and that's where Hal lashes back. Now, what she's saying is true, and that's why I say it feels like the rational part of Hal. Losing a person is hard, and the only thing you can really do to make the pain better is to take all the beautiful and wonderful things you remember about them and fill that hole with it. Otherwise, that hole will fill with sadness and misery, and it will destroy you from the inside out. That's exactly what she's talking about here. But Hal rejects all of that, right? I don't want memories. They are not enough. And anyone who's ever lost anyone will tell you, yeah, that's exactly how it feels. You don't want memories of the person, you want the person, right? You don't want the experiences you shared together, you want the person to share new experiences with. That's all you want, is the person to come back. Except for Hal Jordan, it's amplified. It's not just his dad. It's not just his mom. It's not just this person or that person. It's everything he's ever known and loved over the course of his life. And so what does he do? He recreates the entirety of Coast City. He uses his ring and reconstructs it all, right? And to a degree, it almost kind of makes him feel like God. Now, I will say he doesn't really run away with godhood, right? It's not like, yes, I am God, right? I can do anything that I imagine. No, like, it brings him momentary satisfaction. And he actually ends up running back into what's basically a construct of Jennifer. Now, the funny thing about Jennifer is that this is both our introduction, if I remember correctly, and an explanation of who she is. The long and short of it is that she was his, teenage sweetheart, and she was the one that actually helped him through the loss of his father in a lot of ways. And so when she talks about the idea that she eventually moved on and she found somebody else, and Hal Jordan, was excited about that feeling, one of the things she talks about is that she was in Coast City at the time it was destroyed. Yet a kind of another nail in the coffin, right? But even then, he's still feeling a kind of satisfaction and really a huge sense of fulfillment with everything he's doing here. He finally has everything back. He's finally at peace. And then what happens? In this moment, when he walks into his home and he starts talking to his dad, it all disappears. And what happens? The Guardians show up, right? And they basically tell him, you have violated the most sacred oath of the Green Lantern Corps, which is using your ring for personal gain. That is never supposed to happen. So you are being brought back, or being told to come back to Oa to face disciplinary action. In this moment, when he's feeling this extreme sense of pain, anger, and grief, and has found something to make it bearable, it gets yanked away by the Guardians. And that moment right there is when Hal Jordan finally snaps, when he loses it, right? And that's when he just seizes the projection of the Guardian, siphons off the power from it, and uses that little bit of power to basically channel, right? To keep his Green Lantern ring going, and takes off into space to confront the Guardians on Oa. Because at this point, he's pissed off. And the idea is that if they won't let him do this, then he will make them let him do this. The problem with that is that as he's traveling to Oa, the Guardians know exactly where he's going, and they know exactly the path he's going to take, and they send as many Green Lanterns after him as they can. And it's tragic, right? It says Oa's overlords have long been loath to directly involve themselves in matters of even the most direst consequences. Thus, they created their pawns, their Green Lanterns, to act in their stead. They fight what is truly the Guardians' battle, and that's where he ends up coming across members of the Green Lantern Corps. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with Geoff Johns' run, and you remember the story, Revenge of the Green Lanterns, that's what this is. It's building off of this moment right here when Hal Jordan is channeling the Spaceways and going after every Green Lantern, or at least overpowering every lantern that's being sent to stop him, right? And so when he's confronted here by both Lara and Ki-Han, at the end of the day, they do seem to understand the grief that Hal Jordan is experiencing, but duty comes before personal emotion and personal attachment, right? And so that's why he literally tells them, right, save yourselves the grief, right? Get the hell out of my way. It's a warning, right? You are not going to stop me, but if you choose to, then by God, there'll be consequences. He says, nothing's going to keep me from reaching Oa. Not you, not the Guardians, not anybody. And that's where Lara just tells him, right? I cannot allow you to pass, Hal Jordan. I have sworn allegiance to the Guardians, and my honor demands that I obey their decrees. And that's when Hal Jordan says, then you're a fool, right? They're using you just like they used me for so long. Now, he's not wrong, right? In fact, while there have been instances of the Guardians manipulating Green Lanterns over the years, it wasn't nearly as complex and in-depth as what Geoff Johns would later do. When Geoff Johns started his run on Green Lantern, he made the Guardians highly duplicitous, that they were always scheming, always manipulating, and had just kind of seen themselves as above the quote-unquote riffraff, right? And that only they are the ones who are capable of guiding the universe, right, to a better place. And everybody else is just supposed to do what they're told, right? There's an arrogance that came along with Geoff Johns' run regarding the Guardians of the Universe, right? And so that's what he's building on here, or at least what he built on there by using this here, right? And that's the crazy thing is he's asked, right? Why, Hal Jordan, why do you fight those who made you what you are? And the response of Hal, because what they made me is a slave, and all I got to show for it is a big hole in the ground that used to be everything that was important to me. And I am through being a servant. I have given enough. I have sacrificed enough. Now I want something back. And if the Guardians won't give it to me, then I will take it. And that's when the dying starts, because at that point, he pulls the rings off of both Ki-Han and Lyra. Right? Now, here's the kicker. They're not dead yet, but by the time we get to the end of it all, yes, they're going to be dead. Because after this, right, it kind of continues on. The Guardians of the Universe are actually kind of shocked by this. They didn't expect Hal Jordan to, number one, be this ruthless, and number two, to be this driven. But honestly, it's because they've always kind of underestimated Hal, and they've underestimated how far he would go for the things that he cares about. It just never became a question before because his loyalties were always in line with the Green Lantern Corps and whatever it was the Guardians were asking for. But that's when he comes across Tomar, right? Honestly, one of his closest allies, one of his closest friends, and truth to tell, one of the most capable of the Green Lanterns. But it doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, despite the fact that he latches a parasite onto Hal Jordan, that's really designed more to hold him than anything else, because of the fact that Green Lanterns derive their abilities from willpower, I mean, Hal Jordan is literally fighting like a man possessed. His willpower is about as high as it's going to get, really until you get to the Venditti run, I think, when he forges a ring out of pure willpower, which was kind of crazy, truth to tell. But it's simply just to say, he overpowers this parasite, takes out Tomar, and then of course a newer Green Lantern named Chance shows up, and he gets taken out too. And Hal Jordan does the exact same thing he's done before. He pulls their rings, gives himself more power, and continues on. And it just goes on that way, right? We're told they all fall before him, before his pain and his rage. The elite of the Corps, laid low by one of their own who fought by their side, they all fall, right? Creon, brilliant tactician, recruited to the core by Hal Jordan himself and defeated by Hal Jordan, right? Everyone who's ever looked up to Hal Jordan, everyone who's ever been recruited by Hal Jordan, anyone who's ever called themselves a friend of Hal Jordan, they have been sent by the Guardians to stop him, and Hal Jordan destroys them nonetheless and takes their ring. But something to notice is the longer this goes on for, the more brutal he becomes, right? The more extreme he becomes, where it starts off, with Kihan and Lyra, a warning, right? Stay out of my way, or you are going to literally be killed, more or less, right? Like either you're in my way or you're out of the way. It just gets to this point where there are no warnings, right? There is no like, stay out of my way, right? If anything, it just becomes vengeance and anger and rage, right? The Guardians have always used me. You are a servant of the Guardians, you die. And that's it, right? He just takes their rings and leaves. And so what the Guardians end up doing is concocting a plan, one that Ganthet does not agree with. Now, when it comes to the Guardians of the Universe, for those of you guys who don't know, Ganthet has always kind of been the quote-unquote main star, so to speak, right? Which is to say, the one that had the most dealings with Hal Jordan directly. So he was kind of like the core, or at least the more prominent of all the Guardians, the one who really got like a voice, as an example. And so as Hal Jordan continues on, the plan doesn't quite come to fruition yet. Instead, what ends up happening is Hal Jordan is confronted by Kilowog. Now, Kilowog is a tough son of a gun. I mean, this guy, right? He's literally the drill instructor for the Green Lantern Corps, because unlike what the show tells you, Green Lanterns do not train other Green Lanterns. I mean, they can under certain situations, which we'll actually talk about here in a little bit. But what usually happens is that a Green Lantern ring will appear to someone and they will say, you have the ability to overcome fear, welcome to the Green Lantern Corps, and then they'll whisk them away to Oa, where they will be trained by Kilowog on how to become a Green Lantern. What the oath is, the expectation of a Green Lantern, they'll be assigned a sector, the whole 9 yards, but it's not that dissimilar from like police training or military training. So that's why it's a little weird that in the TV show, Hal Jordan is personally training John Stewart. It doesn't really work that way in the comics, but the show's not a one-for-one. And so when Hal Jordan shows up here to confront Kilowog, Kilowog's doing what he has to, but have no illusions. It's not something he enjoys, right? When Hal shows up here, he says, those heartless Guardians, right? They even send you against me, right? And literally Kilowog says, especially me, right? They want you stopped, Hal, no matter what. I don't want to fight you, right? But my first loyalty has got to be to the Corps and to the Guardians. And that's all Hal Jordan needs to hear. He just says, well, then too bad, right? You can't beat me, Kilowog. You can see how armed I am, because Hal Jordan's got multiple rings, right? Which just amplifies his power several times over. And that's where Kilowog says, didn't I teach you anything? It's the warrior, not his weapons. And Hal Jordan just says, we'll see. And this is one of the coolest things, because Mr. Know-It-All really pointed this out in his YouTube channel. Those of you guys who don't know who Mr. Know-It-All is, he's a really dope content creator, right? I'll post a link to his channel in the description so you guys can check it out, but he's really cool. He has this like amazing video that I think is about 30 minutes long, where he talks about the nature of what it means to be a Green Lantern and what the show gets right about a person possessing a lantern ring. And the entirety of it is really predicated on this very simple idea. It's not about the weapon, it's about the person. And more often than not, the nature of the lantern ring, how it gets used, is oftentimes a reflection of the person who uses it. Sure, Hal Jordan is probably the most resourceful and certainly the most capable of the Green Lanterns, arguably the bravest of all the Green Lanterns. But when it comes to hard-light constructs, he's hardly the most creative. That title belongs to Kyle Rayner, a dude who was making whole-ass mechs out of Green Lantern constructs. It was amazing. It's the reason why a lot of fans who grew up with Kyle Rayner in the 90s adore Kyle Rayner, because of the nature of his hard-light constructs. They were just so intricate, which makes sense. His character was a comic book artist, right, within the DC universe, so he basically translated that into his constructs. But we get this amazing monologue that kind of explains all of this, where it says, it can happen to anyone, really, even the best of us. It weighs on you, the responsibility of wielding one of the most awesome weapons in the universe, literally billions of lives dependent upon you. And what do you get in return? Not much. Frankly, you have all this power, and at some point you wonder, what good is it to me what has it done for me, right? And you don't like the answer, and you do something about it, right? Now, this statement is kind of predicated on selfish purposes, but there is a reason for it. And honestly, it makes sense. When you're someone like Hal Jordan and you're wielding a ring, and what you can do with this is limited only by your imagination, and then one day you come home and find out everything you know and love has been obliterated, of course you're going to use that ring, at least on some level, to restore the things you care about. So in reality, who's more of the villain here? Right, Hal Jordan for going after, or at least taking out all these members of the Lantern Corps, which I guess maybe the question should be who's more of a villain, because that's definitely a villainous act. Or is it the Guardians, because they refuse to acknowledge his grief? They refused to look at him as a man who was suffering, and instead simply said, you violated one of the laws, one of the most sacred laws of the Green Lantern Corps, you need to come to Oa so you could be disciplined for it. Like literally, they're disciplining for grieving, is the way in which he's interpreting it. Right? That's the crazy thing, because he ends up overcoming Kilowog, right? Knocking him out and says, you taught me how to be a warrior. I'm sorry, I never dreamed that I'd be forced to use everything that you taught me against you. And so he just says, you're running out of fodder to send against me, Guardians. It's coming down to just us, and I am coming for you. And literally races off to Oa, where he ends up coming to the Central Power Battery. Now, the Central Power Battery, and maybe I'm kind of jumping the gun here in relation to the Green Lantern mythos, for the longest time in DC Comics, the Central Power Battery was just a battery that existed there and was quote unquote the source of the Green Lantern power. And that was it, right? One of the things that Jeff Johns introduced was something called the emotional spectrum, and that willpower is part of the emotional spectrum. And in fact, over the years, even that's expanded to become, I think, one of the 7 fundamental sources of energy or creation within the DC universe. But in effect, what Hal Jordan is doing here, and what all Green Lanterns do when they basically use their powers, is they're drawing on what is in effect cosmic energy that actually exists on a multiversal level. We know that because of everything with Volthoom on Earth 15. If you don't know what that means, not a great big huge deal. The point is, he's drawing on cosmic energies, right? And so that's what's kind of happening as far as the Central Power Battery, and that's how it works. Again, kind of jumping the gun with that explanation. But the fact is, once he shows up here and the Guardians kind of project themselves, they tell him, enough, 2814, compound your crimes, no further. And that's one of the things that was always kind of interesting, was basically referencing him by sector instead of by name. In a lot of ways, it's what kind of created this disconnect between the Guardians and the Green Lantern Corps. It's one of the ways, or one of the things that Hal was kind of frustrated about here in this moment, right? And really within the comic, it was the impersonal nature of it all. Green Lanterns are a tool to be used by the Guardians, not people or sentient beings wielding power provided to them by the Guardians, right? So it's one of these things where it's like, the Guardians don't care about them. They just care that they uphold the charter of the Green Lantern Corps as it was created by the Guardians. And in fact, they maintain that attitude even here, right? They tell him, right, surrender your ring while you can, right? Otherwise, you're going to be destroyed. And he's kind of like, surrender? Like, that's ridiculous. I've literally faced off against every Green Lantern that you have put against me and defeated them all. You're telling me this because you're in a state of panic, and it's the only ace that you have up your sleeve, trying to intimidate me into giving up my power. And that's what the Guardians tell him. No, it is our power to give and take as we please. The impersonal nature of it all. You, Hal Jordan, are a tool to be used, and you are a tool that is not functioning the way that it's supposed to, right? Because of this defect, essentially, we are taking your power away, and we will give it to someone who will be better at doing what we tell them to do. It's so crazy, right? And it's such an abuse in a lot of different ways. And that's why you get this really cool moral question. Who is more of the villain here? And so Hal Jordan, in hearing this statement that the power is actually the Guardians, that he just says, I'm not so sure anymore, right? Because honestly, if you could stop me, you would stop me here, right? And that's where they simply say, then you leave us with no alternative. And at that point, they present Sinestro, who up to this point, due to any number of crimes, the least of which was literally using his Green Lantern ring to make himself a dictator of his sector, he's been locked away within the Central Power Battery of the Green Lantern all this time. Now, there is a massive retcon that Jeff Johns does, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, because it's huge and it kind of has to be addressed here. at least in some capacity. One part of that retcon we're going to leave out. But the point is, Sinestro was always more capable than Hal Jordan in a variety of ways. It's why he was his arch nemesis. And maybe I'm kind of overstating a bit. Maybe I'm kind of jumping the gun by saying more capable, but I think it's generally accepted that Sinestro just seemed to be more capable than Hal. Now again, ultimately he was defeated, but the fact is, what really makes Sinestro dangerous here, and the thing that really concerns Hal Jordan in his fight against Sinestro, is that Sinestro's ruthless. He does not have any of the moral scruples that the other members of the Green Lantern Corps has. And that's why Hal Jordan is actually concerned about facing off against Sinestro, because he will not hold back, to say nothing of the fact that he is prodigious when it comes to using a Green Lantern ring, right? This guy is so capable. There's a reason why fans of the Green Lantern mythos love Sinestro, and rightfully so, right? Sinestro's dope, especially when he builds his own core. Yeah, we'll talk about that here in a minute. So what ends up happening in the fight between the two of them is that it's knockdown drag out, right? And in fact, initially, Sinestro starts playing mind games with Hal Jordan, right? He talks to him about the idea that when Hal Jordan first came to the Green Lantern Corps, they wanted Sinestro to take Hal under his wing, because Hal didn't really have what it took to become a Green Lantern, that only Sinestro, who by and large was the most capable of the Green Lanterns up to that point in time, the best of them, only he was the one that was capable of teaching Hal Jordan what he needed to know. But Hal Jordan taking all of this as really Sinestro's attempt at intimidation is like, okay, so it's the same old game that it always was. Cool, we can play that game, but when I win, I want there to be no doubt that it was you against me. No power amps, no special abilities, nothing like that. So he dumps every single ring except for his own, and in that moment, goes toe-to-toe with Sinestro. And the fight's intense, right? I mean, Sinestro's like shooting, literally like basically his version of ninja stars out of his ring. Hal Jordan's conjuring shields. I mean, it's an amazing fight between the two. There's energy blasts, the whole 9 yards. But the whole time, they're going back and forth here, because Hal Jordan is like, you deserve worse than this. Like, sure, you were locked away in the Green Lantern Battery, and yes, you talk about how you didn't really have a body, and it was like some kind of an itch you couldn't scratch because there was no form, or whatever the case is. But the reality is, you deserve worse than that. You deserve to die for everything that you did, right? The Guardians must be mad to have released you here. Like, what in God's name were they thinking? But that's the irony behind all of this. Instead of Hal Jordan being of rational mind, sitting down and saying, is this how extreme I've become? That the Guardians of the Universe are forced to unleash someone like Sinestro against me in order to stop me? No, he never draws that conclusion. Instead, the problem is the Guardians. This is how lost the Guardians are. This is how screwed up the Guardians are. They released Sinestro. It's all their fault. Now, on some level, this is actually choice selection bias, which is to say we as people are given choices A and B, and we choose A. Then we realize choice B was the better choice. What we'll actually do is just use mind games and mental gymnastics to convince ourselves we made the right choice, even if we know we didn't. And on some level, Hal Jordan is doing exactly that. Hal Jordan is quite literally, at least on some level, seems to recognize how far he's fallen, but at this point, in for a penny, in for a pound, might as well stay the course, because there is no coming back. From everything he's done, there's no going back. There's no Guardian saying, we understand, Hal, we get it. You were grieving, we should have recognized that. Our bad, bro. Just go back to Earth and don't do it again. No. We're way past that. We are way beyond that, right? At this point, if he were to simply just stop and walk away, yeah, it's the science cells for this guy. He's going to spend the rest of his existence in a prison cell. There's no redemption, no nothing, right? This is it. And so that's why he seems to keep the course. That and the fact that he is so lost here, right? He is so far gone. But at the end of the day, despite the best efforts of Sinestro to screw with the mind of Hal Jordan, it doesn't work. If anything, all it does is amplify his anger even further. And so it all comes down to the two of them firing off energy blasts towards one another and seemingly canceling each other's shots out. And so at that point, because of the fact that they've basically depleted, or at least seem to deplete their energies, it comes down to just a knockdown fist fight between the two, right? And that's what gets crazy about it, because in this fight, Hal Jordan overcomes Sinestro, right? And he tells him, Sinestro, it's not that easy. right? You are not going to take me down like that. That's never going to happen. And he says, we are not finished, right? And that's where Sinestro just says, oh, we're finished, all right. Both of us are finished, right? Because Sinestro has finally, at least in some way, drug Hal Jordan down to his level, right? The way this story is originally written, that's what's going on here, right? And that's where Hal asks the question, what are you talking about? I finally beat you. I won, right? And that's where Sinestro's like, did you, Jordan? Look at yourself and answer me, right? Tell me you're the good guy here. After everything you've done, look in the mirror and tell me that you think you're the good guy. And that's where Hal just says, I should have done this a long time ago, and snaps the neck of Sinestro, kills him on the spot, right? Hal Jordan kills Sinestro. And that right there, if there were any chance of redemption, it is now gone. And so that's where he just says, no one left to stop me, right? The power is mine for the taking, mine so I can get everything right. And that is when Kilowog shows back up. And Kilowog just says, you're too lost, because he was knocked out. He wasn't destroyed, but he just tells Hal Jordan, you're lost, right? There's no saving you, right? There is no bringing you back. There's nothing that can be done here. I will do what I have to do. And if that means killing you, then that's exactly what I will do, right? That's what will have to be done. And that's the crazy thing about this, is that he says the power, right? I can't think about anybody else now, because what Kilowog tells him is, you've killed every Green Lantern that exists out there. And the response of Hal is, no, I didn't. I just took their rings. They had enough power to survive. And the response of Kilowog, for now, right? But what about the ones whose rings you took and they were just floating out there in space? How long before they suffocate and die, right? Or just die to exposure of radiation? What about all the Green Lanterns that are not here because they're on the other side of the universe? They have no idea that this is going on, and they're facing off against some enemy, and their Green Lantern ring is the only reason they're alive. What happens when you take the central power battery and they lose their abilities? Then what happens, right? You have either directly or indirectly killed every single Green Lantern. So if I have to stop you to keep you from killing the rest, that's exactly what I will do. And that's why Hal says, I can't be worried about that. I can't be concerned about that, right? I just have to set everything right, because that's the core of it, right? I have to fix Coast City, right? I was not there when Coast City needed me. I did not protect it. I failed. That's literally the core of it all, right? It's just survivor's guilt in almost every sense of the word, and the feeling of personal failure. And that's where Kilowog just tells him, pull it together, Hal, right? You killed Sinestro, but you're not evil like he was. And to be honest, man, the guy kind of had it coming, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, Kilowog, he doesn't really say that, but I mean, like, come on, like, you know he means it, right? But at the end of the day, Kilowog tells him, you can still stop. And the response of Hal, no, I can't. He blocks the shot of Kilowog and incinerates him with his ring, kills Kilowog on the spot, right? And that's where he just says, I have crossed the line, Kilowog, and I cannot go back. And so he takes off his lantern ring, throws it, and just says, I don't deserve this anymore. And that's when the Guardians show up and they tell him, true, 2814, you do not. You have committed heinous acts, caused irreparable damage. You will be punished. And the response of Hal, by who? By you, right? You haven't taken a personal interest in anything for so long. You've forgotten how, right? I finally see you for what you are, impotent shams, right? I just wanted to have my life again. You could have given me the power to make everything right. You could have let me do that. I wasn't abusing it. I wasn't doing what Sinestro was doing. I wasn't turning Earth into a giant planet that I rule with an iron fist. All I wanted was to reconstitute my city and come to terms with the fact that they were all gone. But you self-righteous gnomes couldn't even do that much, right? All you were capable of was turning your back on me. And that's where the Guardians just tell him, to tamper with what has been is the most grievous crime of all, which is clearly a reference to Krona, right? Krona being a former Guardian who used a device to look at the creation of all existence, accidentally spawned the antimatter universe, and set in motion the events that would become Crisis on Infinite Earths, right? So there is a reason for the Guardians to believe that messing with the past is a problem. But there's a big difference between messing with the past and Hal Jordan just reconstituting his city, right? And that's where Hal just says, don't you think I know that, right? And haven't you realized I am beyond caring? It's too late for that. It's too late for me, and it's too late for you. There is no turning back now, right? What's going to happen is going to happen. It has to. You cannot stop it, and neither can I. And so in that moment, he literally jumps into the central power battery and starts draining all of its powers and channeling them into himself. And that's where the Guardians just say, thusly, it ends, right? We simply allow him to expunge our grand design. Is that really what we're gonna do? We're gonna sit back and do nothing? And the question's asked, right? Like, are we too atrophied to save ourselves? Are we too incompetent to be able to protect ourselves from all of this? And that's what the other Guardians just kind of resign themselves and are like, yes, it's done, right? And so Ganthet's like, am I the only one around here who thinks this is a problem, right? Who thinks it's an issue that we're just gonna roll over and die and just let Hal Jordan take everything in existence, like literally channel all that power for himself? And that's where the statement's made. Ganthet is right. Individually, no, there's nothing we can do, but Ganthet can. We must act, and Ganthet is the one. And so in that moment, that leads to Hal Jordan literally emerging in his just iconic armored form, right? Which honestly, he always looked dope in that way. But it's also the death of the Guardians of the Universe, everyone save for Ganthet. And so as Hal Jordan is walking away, literally he steps on his ring and shatters it, right? Crushes it. And that's when Ganthet re-emerges as basically now the collective knowledge and essentially life energy of all the other Guardians who were here, right? And he says, I grieve for you, brothers, though we disagreed bitterly more often than not. I fear, however, there is little time for eulogies. You gave me the last of your strength, and I know what is to be done, right? Our greatest champion, yet we did not stand by him in his need. Our unwavering adherence to our edicts prevented the slightest compassion, which is effectively an acknowledgement they didn't do enough. They could have been there for him in a way that they weren't. And so what ends up happening? Ganthet ends up reconstituting the ring of Hal Jordan, takes off to Earth, and shows up in an alleyway where he meets Kyle Rayner. Simply just tells him, you're gonna have to do, and gives Kyle Rayner the Green Lantern ring. And so Kyle is now the last remaining Green Lantern. Now understand, John Stewart and Guy Gardner are still alive, but John Stewart at this point basically becomes a Dark Star because he loses his Green Lantern powers, and Guy Gardner already has his own story where he was Warrior, I think, at this point in time. So, with that being said, guys, this goes into the Ron Mars run, and eventually the Jeff Johns retcon. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.